Okay. We're still like 1 minute early, but so tell me, not again, via show of hands, not with your mouth. What are your backgrounds? And so we're, PASS is a very SQL Server heavy conference, but we've been doing a lot to bring more and more of the sort of the analyst side, the analytics side of the house into the fold. And so I'm wondering how many of you are would identify primarily as full-time, and again, job titles change a lot, right? Forget actual job title, but how many of you would identify your primary job is analysis or analytics, okay? As opposed to primary job is databases, storage, and IT sort of tech stuff, okay? Some of you raised your hand twice, right? Is that right? You know what primarily means, right? Hey, that's great. I was just talking before I turned on my microphone about what a great thing it is that we've got hybrids in the world now. We're moving towards, I think we are moving towards a world in which there's really, like especially for analytics, there's not going to be these artificial distinctions between IT and business. That we're not going to actually be successful, even as a species, until those walls are basically gone. So you're all here for Excel, yeah? All right. One other quick survey. Because I've given a version of this talk for almost, better part of 10 years, believe it or not. What's your level of familiarity? Like, so how many of you have used a lot of Power BI? Okay. How about Power Pivot? Power Query? Okay. So on one hand, I'm terrified because, hey, I might not have anything new to show you. We'll see. Right? On the other hand, I never script things so strictly that we can't diverge a bit. So I go to a lot of, just so you understand where I'm coming from, I go to a lot of conferences where I show off what is sitting in Excel on people's machines that they are not aware it's there. They don't even know that they have it. And that that's a great community service to do, right? To tell you about the things that are amazing that Microsoft has done everything in their power not to tell you about. For those, there's a couple of you that were in my last session. For you, the next two slides about introduction are going to be a repeat, but then after that, we're not doing, there's only those two slides. And everything after that, we're going to be in Excel, okay? It's not like we can push back, that's... All right, so here's me. I'm Rob Collie. I went straight from college to Microsoft. I like to say that there are these sealed, vacuum-sealed and atmospherically controlled tubes that are used to transport people from the college academic environment straight to the Microsoft academic environment so that you are not polluted by the real world in transit. It's important that you remain in the bubble at all times. And for the last 10 years, I've been outside the bubble and really shocked at what's going on out here. It's not at all what they told us inside the wire. I was at Microsoft long enough and got just high enough on the middle management chain that I got to have one face-to-face with each of the three of Microsoft's historical CEOs. And it was 3 different flavors of failure in those meetings. Got badly cursed out in one of them, scolded with poetry. Literally, poetry was quoted in a second one, and largely ignored in the third. But they weren't one-on-one, but they were face-to-face. It was a small conference room, meeting, and Yeah, one of them was brutal. I use a lot of stick figures in my presentations because I believe in the Einstein quote, which is, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. I joked in the last session that I don't really have stick figures for these guys, the three Microsoft CEOs. However, this one is actually meant to be Bill Gates as a Roman god standing on top of a gigantic mountain of money. And I'm not repurposing it. This was drawn exactly for this purpose. This is a one-of-a-kind piece of art. And talks about, in one of my other talks, how Bill, in his wisdom, standing on Mount Olympus of money, bequeaths technology to IT on the left and to the number crunchers, the analysts on the right, and how if we'd had the right software from the very beginning, we wouldn't have had separate gifts, separate software for each crowd. We wouldn't have had this bifurcation. The bifurcation of how we handle data in an analytical sense between IT and business is a historical artifact created by the types of technologies that were released, starting really in the 80s. Meaning we shouldn't put too much stock in that division, right? If we get the right tools, we might as well evolve. And this talk is mostly about showing you those tools. So at Microsoft, I mostly worked on Excel. So hey, this is talk about Excel, so I can talk a little bit more about that aspect of it. So on the 2007 release of Excel, when I was at Microsoft, I was in charge of the team that did all of the business intelligence related features in Excel 2007. So for the veterans of you who were in the room, who were working on and using pivot tables back then, and pivot tables just changed on you super suddenly in 2007 when that happened, yeah, that was us. We did that to you. Also for you, right? It's better. They're a lot better, but I bet it was not fun when that happened. I bet you didn't. I bet you were cursing and you just didn't even know who to curse. Now you know. Yeah. Listen, I was there when the ribbons, I was there when the ribbons came in, when they replaced the menus and toolbars, and everyone was really upset. I didn't do that. However, might as well have, because I support it, right? I think the ribbon is genius, and I'll take that fight, right? I'll defend the ribbon to the death. And besides, by now you all have learned to love the ribbon. And if we took it away from you and went back to menus and toolbars, you'd be more angry at us now than anyway. Sorting by color. I didn't do that, but that was that same release, 2007. I know the people who did it. I'll sign autographs after the talk. Sort by color. All right, this is going to be fun. I'm going to enjoy this talk. Thank you. All right, so that was Excel. At one point, I was recruited to join the super secret skunkworks project that at the time only had a code name, which we weren't allowed to do in Office. Office wasn't allowed to have code names anymore because Sinofsky said we couldn't do it. But on the SQL Server side of the house, they could have Project Gemini, okay? And Project Gemini ultimately became known as Power Pivot. And Power Pivot is basically, Power BI is basically Power Pivot V2. It's Power Pivot do-over, in a way. Power Pivot with better visuals. Power Pivot with more control over our own destiny type of thing. Okay, so that's Power Pivot, right? And so you might as well, by the time I left Microsoft, the words Power BI didn't exist yet. There wasn't such a thing as Power BI, but there was Power Pivot. And so I like to kind of sneaky claim that I'm grandfathered in that I did work on Power BI because I worked on Power Pivot, but I didn't actually work on Power BI. Okay, so the most important thing I learned about software is how much it sucks. It's terrible. I'm a terribly harsh critic of software, but I love this stuff. At my own company, I'm famous somewhat for when we're going to roll out a new system, a new software system at the company, everyone's like, oh, Rob's going to hate this. And they're right, I always do. That's how much I dislike software. But this stuff, 10 years on, I'm still talking about it. So to start with that 10 years ago thing, in the galaxy far, far away, I was I found myself living in that distant galaxy known as Ohio, which I used to joke was like, actually I was living in Cleveland, which I used to tell people, it's like the Silicon Valley of the Midwest. And they'd say, really? And I said, no, definitely not. But Ohio is where it started for real, is when I saw something. And I'm not kidding. Like, I actually saw something like at 3 o'clock in the morning, sitting in my home office, that I just sat back in my chair and went, wow. And then I had this rush of thoughts, and I knew, basically in that moment, that the industry, whatever you want to call it, it goes by so many different names because we're constantly trying to relabel it, make it sound cool, right? Business intelligence, analytics, whatever. All of that was going to change, and change dramatically, because of what I could tell at that moment, because I had just built something that so far exceeded my expectations using Power Pivot, and in so little time, that I was like, oh my God. So there's a difference between foresight and depth perception. You thought about this? You ever heard about this? So like, I saw with supreme clarity, and for once in my life, things have gone exactly as I foresaw, like the Emperor in Star Wars, right? Like, I called my shot on this. Everything that I saw at that moment, like in early 2010, has happened or is happening. However, it's taken many, many, many more years than I expected. Things have been moving very slowly, which is good news, because we're all early. We can be 10 years late to the party, and still super, super, super early, because I think the world is really slow to pick up on this stuff. So I started a company, Power Pivot Pro. At the time, it was just me. That was 10 years ago. But we have now, I've moved to Indiana, but we've now set up shop in all of these states, not every state in the union. But as I joked, and not even a joke, as I observed with the last crowd, we would carry the electoral college, right? So in terms of, like we're over that magic number in terms of population, and I also, like, we've been prioritizing hiring in either Tennessee or Arkansas, because that would allow us to cut the whole country in half and sever the competition supply lines. We're closing in. We've got you. You might know us from our book. It was published now like 4 years ago. We really need to update this thing. So much has happened, but it's still the #1 seller on Power BI. So maybe you've got that book. Maybe you've seen it. And that's the end of the slideshow. Okay. I don't have any more slides. What I have is a bunch of demos. And again, I'm a little cringy up here that I'm going to be showing you things. You're all be like, I've seen that before, So ask me questions. I encourage the last crowd to ask me questions, and I got a lot of great questions. We also had a bit of a 10-minute verbal fist fight over a religious topic, or science, a technologically religious topic, not actual religion. What's that? No, it was data warehousing. The name Richard Kimball was said in a hushed tone, and then I did my usual irreverent thing, and anyway, you missed it. It was great. Anyway, I want questions, okay? Including like, could you also do something like this? That kind of question is also fine. I have a path that I'm going to take through this stuff, but let's diverge. You with me? By the way, it also makes it easier on me if there's any sort of interaction, because then it gives me a sense of where everybody's at. And otherwise, I'm just plowing through a routine. Okay? Let's not do that. All right, let's go.
Where are you, Indy?
I'm in Indy, yes. Yeah. That's it. First question. That counts. All right. All right, we've already got this open. Okay, so the first thing I like to show people is that you know, some of you in here, and this is great, some of you in here don't know what's lurking in Excel. So let's at least start off addressing that. So if you go into File, Options, Add-ins, and then you manage, you know, because everyone needs to know that there's many different flavors of add-ins, folks. It's important to your existence as a human being that you know. So, I mean, if I'm going to run an add-in in Excel, you'd think it's an Excel add-in, yeah? Rookies. No, you want to manage your COM add-ins, because everyone needs to know about component object model. You probably have this checkbox here, Power Pivot for Excel. And if you don't have that checked, I highly recommend you check it, because this is, you could also call this unhide the coolest thing in Excel, because we like to ship it in the box turned off by default. For yucks. Right? So is anyone in here, and this is for me, just tell me that you didn't know this checkbox was in there. Sweet. See? That's what I'm talking about. And if you're on like the 365 versions of Excel, you've got this. If you're on any flavor of 2016, you've got this. In 2013, they were doing that thing where they take the features out, some features out of certain versions of the products to make you buy the more expensive versions of the products, but they always realize that's a mistake and then put it back in all the versions. This is a cycle that repeats forever. And so Power Pivot is now back in all versions of Excel, at least in the modern wave. Was that a question or a participation? Okay. Why is it hidden like this? Yeah, okay, so this is big company. For Microsoft is a big company with lots of different departments that only meet at Satya, right? And they all have completely different missions, unfortunately. So on the one hand, the Power BI folks are trying to advance the state-of-the-art of analytics and BI and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's great. On the other hand, the Office organization is, they only really have one thing on their mind at all times, and that's Google Docs. Okay? That's the only thing that really gets the Office team's attention. That's their big competitor, right? And so Power BI has done a great job, by the way, of vanquishing all of their competitors. Like the route is on in that space, and it should be, because it's the best by far, and it's the cheapest, which is shocking, right? But you know, even when I was still there at Microsoft, Google Docs was already like the big specter looming on the horizon. And 10 years later, that's still the case. So it's very hard to get the Office team's sustained attention on a particular mission like BI for very long. So Power Pivot is not a, again, I think this is sad in a lot of ways for us, even for them, but it's still kind of an afterthought for the Excel team. And it's an add-in, parts of it are an add-in which slow down boot time and reduce reliability. So those are the sorts of things that they always turn off by default. But my versions always have it turned on, okay? Okay, so Power Pivot is like, here, for those of you, so I talk about the VLOOKUP and Pivot crowd, right? If you use VLOOKUP or some variant thereof, has anyone gotten into this XLOOKUP thing lately? Huh? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. I think that's really cute that they continue to improve those things. When they've got Power Pivot in the box, it's much better. But it gives you an idea of what's going on. So if you use VLOOKUP and pivot tables, those are like the genetic markers for what I call the data gene. Okay? And I bifurcate the world of Excel usage into the people who are VLOOKUP and Pivot and up, and everybody else. So if you use VLOOKUP and Pivot, I'm here to tell you, you are good. You are an advanced Excel user. That's the cutoff. You might not think so. You probably think, it's kind of, that's not that advanced. It absolutely is advanced. Right? I've spent 20 years basically studying you. I'm a sociologist. You tell me you use VLOOKUP and Pivot, I can tell you what you had for breakfast. I can tell you how your peers and colleagues treat you. I can tell you what happens to you in unfortunate situations at work. And I can call my shot. It's crazy how much I know about you. Okay? You're my people. If you're, again, addressing the VLOOKUP and Pivot crowd, pivot tables. How many of you use them? Okay. Now, there's a feature of pivot tables called calculated fields. You know what I'm talking about? All right. Is it good? Yeah? It's pretty limited? Yeah, yeah. So when I mentioned I was in charge of that team in 2007, one of my job duties on that team was to not improve the calculated field feature of pivot tables. I was really good at that part of the job. But it turns out I'm nothing special because my predecessor was just as good as me at not improving it. My successors have all been really good at not improving it, okay? In some sense, what you should think of Power Pivot as being, imagine an entire software team of like, several dozen people spent 10 years developing an improved replacement, dramatically improved, and by the way, not an average software team either, some of the absolute best and brightest at Microsoft. Spent 10 years plus building an alternate version of that calculated field feature and then released it to us all at once. Oh, and customer tested it a lot and refined it along the way. Power Pivot does that. Right? Power Pivot also puts an end to multiple things. Power Pivot puts an end to the need for VLOOKUP to power analyses. Power Pivot puts an end to data limitations, like that million row limit. No more. Power Pivot also puts an end to slow spreadsheets because you can bring Excel to its knees speed-wise well before you hit the 1 million row limit, right? You can hurt yourself with 60,000 rows, can't you? Yeah. Vertipack. So the question is that the work of Vertipack and that acquisition? Well, that's really jumping ahead in a lot of cool ways. Okay, so let's say yes for now. I'm going to say yes because no one else knows what we're talking about. But then I'm going to say it wasn't an acquisition. It was homegrown. It was homegrown. I didn't do it. I'm not smart enough to have helped build that thing. But I sat next to the people who were smart enough to build it, and I got to look over their shoulder, and it was awesome. Okay, so let me just show you. I have an Excel workbook here, and it's got some data in it on various sheet tabs. You're used to that kind of stuff, right? What you're not used to, if you're new to this game, is on the Power Pivot ribbon tab, I can open up this separate window, and it has different kinds of sheet tabs in it. This is not your usual sheet tab type. This is a magic sheet tab. And these sheet tabs have a number of magical properties, one of them being that they can hold an enormous amount of data. I don't have time to show you it in this talk, but I have a spreadsheet, seriously, file extension XLSX on this laptop with 300 million rows of data in it. And it recalculates like butter. It's beautiful. It's fast. It's awesome. But how many of you have 300 million rows of data? A few of you? Yeah, okay, yeah, right. But notice how most people didn't raise their hands. Okay, so if you didn't raise your hand, I don't want you to be discouraged. Power Pivot, modern Excel, it's not about 300 million rows. I use these tools to analyze even like 50 rows of data because it's just better. It also happens to have the property of it can eat as much data as you could ever imagine throwing at it. I go so far as to say that some of you who didn't raise your hand and say you don't have 300 million rows of data, you actually do. You just would never conceive of loading it all at once, right? Because the universe would collapse, right? And yeah. So the 300 million row, it's like 600 megs, 600, 700 megs, which normally in Excel terms would be frightening, right? you know not to open a 600, 700 megabyte Excel file. You know what happens when you do that, right? Because a regular Excel file at 600, 700 megabytes on disk inflates to gargantuan size in RAM. You might not think of it that way, but it is not, it doesn't eat the same amount of RAM as what it eats on disk. It uncompresses into memory, into a beast. It might be 20, 30, 40 times larger easily in RAM. And that's the problem, right, is that you don't have that much RAM or that much patience. Whereas these workbooks compress dramatically. In the last demo, I was cheating a little bit. I was using some fake data that I manufactured. But I had, in my last talk, I had about 9 gigabytes of data in my workbook. And my workbook was only 6 megabytes on disk. That's like 1,500 to 1 compression. For those of you who didn't want to do the megabyte to gigabyte conversion, it's 1,000x, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But yeah, this stuff compresses like crazy, and it stays compressed when you load it. So the size that you see on the disk is a much closer relative of how much memory it's going to eat than an Excel case. So that 600, 700 megabyte workbook that I'm talking about loads and runs fine. It takes a little while to load off the disk. Right? But once it's loaded, it's good. Whereas the other one is a reboot, hard power down your computer, right? You know you're going to be pressing the power button and holding it down for a few seconds. So you shouldn't, in a modern Excel environment, the size of the file doesn't have that same fear-triggering loop. Right? You got to relearn what's bad and what's not. Okay. All right. So I'm going to show you here. So in order for Power Pivot to see this data and use it, it has to be on one of these special sheet tabs. It doesn't count if it's still sitting over in Excel, because the Excel sheet is 1970s, 1980s technology. You need a special new thing. By the way, this separate window is the same file name as the main window. So this separate window isn't its own. It's not a separate app. It's a window into the contents of this file. If those of you who've ever written VBA macros, there's 2 windows for that. It's the very same thing. It's 2 windows for the same file. And in fact, when I was on the Power Pivot team, this is what I did. I modeled this 2-window approach after the 2-window VBA approach. Okay? So if I press save in this window or save in that window, the same thing happens both times, is that the contents of both windows get saved into a single file. Yeah, Power Pivot ribbon tab, and then press this Manage button. Anyway, they've got all kinds of names here. Like they've got Power Pivot, they've got Data Model, they got the Power Pivot icon, and the word Manage. They really couldn't put more words that disagree with one another. It's just for one button, folks. Yeah. Okay. I like to say that Microsoft, and this is me as well when I was there, we were good, really good at building software and bad at everything else, including naming things. Naming things is great. Okay, so I've already put some, let me just reorganize this real quick. I've already put some data into my Power Pivot window, but it's not very much. It's really just this one table of dates. For each row in here is an individual date and a bunch of things about that date, the month start date, the day of the week, all that kind of stuff, okay? So I've just preloaded that. However, all this other stuff, like sales orders, this is the first thing I want to analyze in this fake data set is the orders I've gotten to sell things at my company, right? All right, again, Power Pivot can't see this here. It needs to get into the other window for Power Pivot to see it and to be able to use it. And so if you've got it in table format, you see how the nice table format? Any of you use that table feature, the real format is table and things like that? That also happened on my team in 2007. And I keep saying that, but it turns out I was the manager of that team. I had 4 or 5 rock stars working for me. They did all of the work. I just sort of stayed out of their way. But it's nice to take credit for their work every now and then. So here, if you press this button, add to data model, this could say add to Power Pivot, right? But add to data model, fine. It will add that table over here into the Power Pivot window. You'll see here that it's giving me a row count, 8,399 rows. It's kind of nice. And the number one way to visualize and even see the results of Power Pivot data is with a pivot table. This window here, the Power Pivot window, is not something that you would ever show to a colleague as a means of answering a question. It's not a reporting surface. It's a workshop. It's where you would build things. It's for you. The only reason you'd ever show this to one of those non-data gene people is to intimidate and impress, which is totally okay. Don't take credit for the things that you can do. All right, so I'm just going to create a pivot table, and it's going to, by default, plop it on a new sheet. And normally you'd see something like this, right? This is a pivot table field list. The only thing that's different here is that I'm seeing multiple tables in my field list, as opposed to just one. How many of you is the first time you've seen this, a pivot table that shows more than one table? Okay. That hints at some cool things, doesn't it? So let's go to orders. And by the way, I'm going to put my field list in side-by-side mode, because when I can access multiple tables of information in a single pivot table, naturally, I'm going to have more things to choose from than I used to in the past. So I love this extra vertical real estate of my field list laid out side by side like this. And this is how Excel stays for me, is in side by side. Yeah?
You had 4 tables accessible?
Yeah. So I had 4 tables in this list, and but I'd only added so many of them to the model. That's because the Excel team's gotten clever. And I want that word clever just to hang there for a moment. And they're kind of looking ahead at other tables that I have in the workbook in Excel and saying, hey, if you use them, we'll go put them in the model for you. We'll do that automatic thing. Okay? Because, again, they have a discoverability problem here. They've got an amazing feature in the product that they haven't told anybody about. So they need ways for you to trip and fall and stumble into it. And this is one of them. But the only ones that I've truly put in there, it's not even showing me the metrics table. Something might actually be off here. It's the beautiful thing about not working for Microsoft anymore. If there is a bug right now, it's not my fault anymore. But we'll see. So let's just go to orders. And as usual, I can take something like, let's say, sales, and just get my total sales amount in there, right? Okay, that's great. If I want to break it out by date, okay, so I can see for every individual date of orders how much revenue was booked, at least in the ordering system, the transactional system on that date. Okay. So right now what I'm doing, nothing I've just done here in this pivot table is different than what regular Excel is, right? This is still just normal pivot table stuff. Where it gets interesting is when I want to see, instead of these, I want to see like the names of the days of the week, or I want to see names of months and stuff like that. In normal Excel, first of all, let's go look at the orders table and see if we have anything in here that looks like names of months and stuff. We do not. Okay, so this would be in the regular Excel world where VLOOKUP enters our life, yeah? Because we have this other table over here that I showed you at the beginning. Fortunately, we have this table. If we didn't have this table, we'd really be out of luck. And for every date, I can look up things about that date, like what day of the week it is, or what month it participated in, that kind of thing, what year it was in. And in regular Excel, what I would do is I'd go to the orders table, right, and I'd fly over here to the right, maybe, and I start writing a VLOOKUP formula to fetch a value a matching value from the other table. This is the Excel equivalent of join for those of you, the SQL people who leaked into here because you didn't know it was an Excel session, but you're too embarrassed to leave. Just kidding. Just kidding. This is what we've got. And if you wanted a bunch of those columns from the dates table in here, you have to write a separate VLOOKUP for each of them. How many of you have put Excel into manual recalc mode recently? The hardcore. OK. This is when I talk about the supercomputer on your desk. You know, we measure the speed of these processors now in gigahertz. If you are not shocked by the existence of the word gigahertz, you haven't thought about it very hard. So let's think about it for a moment. A gigahertz is a billion things per second. These processors in our laptops that we take for granted are capable of performing multiple billions of calculations in a single second. And they don't even put one CPU in these things anymore. Like, everyone's got at least 4. And so I don't even know. This thing's probably like 2 gigahertz times 4. So I get 8 gigahertz, 8 billion calculations a second. You would think that these computers would be a bit more useful than they are, right? At that rate. OK, so if you put Excel into manual recalc mode recently, this should really sting. How the hell can Excel be slow with 8 billion calcs a second, right? And it's because I don't have to even, I can tell you without even looking at your spreadsheet, that any spreadsheet that you've put in manual recalc mode is using at least one of the following. It's using VLOOKUP, or XLOOKUP, or index match, or any of those sorts of things. Or it's using array formulas, or it's using SUMIFs, and things like that. And what do those things all have in common? I haven't heard it yet. They're all looking for matches. Calculations are fast. You can't make Excel slow with numbers. Go give it a try. Just have it crunch a bunch of numbers. You'll never make a slow spreadsheet just crunching numbers. But when you make it look for matches, it wasn't built for that. It has to go boil the ocean to find its neighbor, OK? We're not going to VLOOKUP. It's a lot of buildup for to say we're just not going to do something. Instead, I'm just going to take date off of here, and I'm going to just tempt fate. I'm going to go over to the dates table, this completely separate table. It's like I'm running with scissors, you know? And I'm going to take, I don't know, let's put month, year on rows. OK. There's 2 things here that are telling me something's wrong, right? I have a warning over here, which is very helpful. But I think even more important is that I can tell something's up with my report. You know, we're data people, you know? And it's even weirder. It's even weirder when you consider that the grand, oh gosh, stop it. The grand total is identical to all of the individual values, which is even fishier, yeah? So I contend we don't need this warning. We don't need to care about this warning. Let me show you what you need to do. You just haven't told Excel, you haven't told Power Pivot about how these 2 tables link to each other. Now, when you write a VLOOKUP, you need, or you do a join in SQL or whatever, you need a column in each table that you can line up with each other, you know, that contains a matching type of set of values. If you don't have that, you're really in trouble, right? And that's not something that I can solve for you. We have that here. We have an order date. We have a date column in my orders table. And we have a column that contains dates up here in this dates column. So that sounds pretty cool. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to right-click on order date in my orders table. See, it's got orders. The orders table is selected, and the order date column is selected by default, because that's what I right-clicked. Then I'll just go pick the dates table from this dropdown, and it automatically selected, because it was able to sort of look at it and say, really, there's only one choice you've got here, Rob. And I click OK. And we go back to Excel, and it recalcs, and everything's right. And one time I was doing this for a crowd, and I've been telling people ahead of time, like, oh, you're going to love it. This is so much better than VLOOKUP, so much faster than VLOOKUP. And there's this guy in the room that said, whoa, that's it? I mean, yeah, isn't that cool? He says, well, you had to like click all kinds of things and change windows. You take your hands off the keyboard. He's one of those guys, you know, that just like can go just write a VLOOKUP with his fingers, you know, just taking your hand off the keyboard is really slow. You know, he's one of those Wall Street trained types. And I said, okay, you're right. That took me a little while compared to you fast fingers, but I didn't write one VLOOKUP. I wrote them all. Every single column in that table is valid for using in my...
So it linked all of the dates based on that one input.
That's right.
All of them.
Yeah, so like I can put, for example, let's see here, where's weekday? Weekday. I put weekday on columns, right? Like these numbers are all correct. I'm not limited, whereas in VLOOKUP, I fetch one column to use it. I fetch one column to use it. This is a linkage between the two tables, and the contents, now every column in both of those tables can be used to cross-reference with each other and produce a combined analysis. And if that's not enough, the relationship will never slow down your workbook. Whereas the 20-something VLOOKUPs that I would have needed to write in that case would have really left a mark, even at this relatively small data volume. Yeah?
Can it handle a composite key?
It cannot handle a composite key. A composite key would be saying, hey, it's these two columns, match these two columns. In the Excel universe, the way we handle that is we usually concatenate them together into a single column. And I swear to you, working on Power Pivot V1, they came to me and said, should we do composite columns, Rob? And I said, nah, just make them concatenate them. And they said, okay, we'll do that. And that's where we're at. You can blame me for the lack of composite keys in tabular analysis services. I gave them the okay. Yes?
As an accountant, I always left join to make sure I don't miss any data. Is that an inner join by default?
So, okay, this guy who just asked that question was introduced to me as an Excel guy, all right? And he just asked me a question about left join, inner join, outer join stuff, right? Right? Does not compute, man. I'm not a SQL guy. I mean, I understand that there are these things, and I can probably reason my way through them. Those of you who know SQL, I'll give you a very, very strong piece of advice. Do not try to translate Power Pivot, Power BI, tabular analysis services. They're all the same thing. They really are. They're just under different guises and different names, different labels, different skins. Don't treat them as SQL mentally. Don't try to put SQL, what's the word? Nomenclature. Don't put SQL nomenclature on these things. The relationships in tabular and Power Pivot and all these sorts of things really are their own beast. And I'll tell you, I have to abbreviate this whole thing, but they're really just filter paths. All they do is transmit filters across tables. That's all they do. So, and the sooner, I've watched people who are good at SQL learning this stuff and like always sort of translating between the SQL world and this world. Okay, that's just like this, and they hit a wall at some point because they can't translate anymore. And I'm sitting there going like, hey, I'm completely unpolluted by the knowledge that's in your head, and I'm doing great. And they actually get, those people, those same people that I've watched, they stall for a while, and the moment that they get really good at this stuff is when they finally let go of SQL. Yeah?
If the math of one table of February 2009 wasn't there, would I lose? Would 58,175 be there?
Okay, so the real concern is if I've got some sort of like, I'm missing some dates in my orders table. No, sorry, I'm missing some dates in my dates table. Would I suddenly now be getting incorrect numbers for the grand total? No, I will always get correct numbers for my totals. What will happen is it will add like a placeholder here that says other in parentheses, and it just piles all the stuff that it couldn't match into there. Just like in, see, like, yeah, I mean, those of us who come purely from the Excel background, we don't have to worry about these things. It just makes sense to us, Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, well, listen, if I were still there, I'd be making these mistakes, naming things weirdly. Yeah, I had to leave Microsoft and work out in the wild for 10 years. I am just now qualified to do the job they used to pay me to do. None of them have taken the 10-year field trip, though. So, you know, I don't know. They do the best we can.
I know there's that whole aspect of the data model that you haven't gone into yet.
Yeah.
If you sort of get the RGB,
It does. Yeah, yeah. We'll get to that in a second, actually. Okay. So if that's all you took away, even from this one session, right, is that you have two tables. You know, you got the reference table, the lookup table, whatever, and you don't have to do VLOOKUPs anymore. I mean, that's worth the price of the trip. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, yeah, I can show how I did that again really quick. So let me, first of all, I have to delete it, right? So you don't have to, you know, this here, manage relationships. I'm going to delete this relationship. Bye-bye, okay? All I did was I went to one of the two matching columns, order date, right-clicked, and chose create relationship, which is at the top. And then I picked the matching column in the table I want to link it to. Mm-hmm. Can you show it in the design view? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Mr. Foreshadowing. You know? OK, so that's good, yeah? Well, let's see here. What do we want to do next? How about returns? Returns are important, aren't they? Because like if people are sending back our stuff, we kind of want to know that, right? We want to know what our real net is, you know? So let's add this one. Add the data model. You know, while we're at it, gosh, let's add some customers. What do you think? This is a lookup table information about all of our customers. Let's just throw that in there too, just for grins. It has to be formatted as a table, or you have to grab things. However, I want to tell you that what I am doing here is bad. All right? So what I have done here, just as an introduction, is to put a bunch of data in Excel so that no one's afraid of me. Right? You see sheets of data in Excel, and you're like, oh, I'm used to that. And then I tell you we need to put it in the Power Pivot window. The right way to do things is not to have, you don't want to have your source data twice in the same workbook. Okay? So rather than having it on all the sheets in this regular Excel workbook and then on all the sheets in the Power Pivot window, I should have started a brand new blank workbook and put all my Power Pivot data in there and have it reaching back to this other file and grabbing tables out of it. Does that make sense? As an import, as if I was connecting to a database almost. And then I wouldn't be able to, I'm not able to use this add to data model button that I've been using, because that add to data model button only works within the same workbook. Anytime you find yourself clicking that add to data model button that I've been showing you and teaching you a bad habit, okay, you should say, oh, that's right, Rob only showed us this way because it's less intimidating, but that's not the way that you're supposed to do it.
you can just pull in data from outside databases right in there.
Yeah, you can pull data from databases, text files, Excel files, and they can all come together in one Power Pivot workbook and play in harmony. It's awesome. They don't have to all come from the same kinds of data sources. That's right. You do not. Yep.
You have a workbook open, and then the Power Pivot workbook open. Can you add the data model that way, or do you have to go to Power Pivot?
Meaning, are we concerned about the file lock when I have a workbook open?
I'm just in terms of making it easier. If I have a workbook open that has tables in it, can add it to a data model from another workbook.
Yeah, but it's going to be an import rather than a click add to data model. It's not going to ask me, do you want to put it in another workbook? You really have to pull. Yeah.
Okay, now, second question.
Uh-huh.
If you are pulling like that and your original file gets moved,
Yeah.
lose it?
OK, so it's important to know that when I press save here, this data is going to be stored in the workbook. OK? Meaning, if I pull from another workbook into a Power Pivot workbook, and then I delete the original workbook, that does not hurt my Power Pivot workbook at all. It has slurped a copy of that data and saved it in its own format. Okay. What it doesn't do, it'll hurt me when I want to refresh. You know, when it's time for me to get the latest version of that data, it's not going to know where to find it when I press the refresh button. So I'll notice it then, but I will not notice it up until that point. Sound good? Okay, so that relationship creating thing that I did, you know, I did it twice. You know, even that right-clicking and picking matching columns, that gets a little ugly and slow and unfun. So how about we go into diagram view, and we can see what our model looks like here. So that line here, this is the relationship I created via right-click earlier. You see how it has an arrow on it that indicates the direction that filters flow, except in Excel 2013 and 2010, in which case the arrow points the wrong direction. I am not kidding. No, actually, the relationship diagram was added after I left, so I get to claim, you know, innocence on it. But I did make fun of it mercilessly for years afterwards, and now they've fixed it. The arrow points in the direction that filters flow, so you know, this customers file that I brought in is very much like dates. It's more information about my orders because I have I think, there we go, customer ID. Now, I know my data pretty well here. I know that the contents of this column are a good match for the contents of this column. So check this out, folks. Hope you're watching, if you've never seen this before. Oh, drag drop. You know, who needs that stinking dialogue? So that drag drop, that was like, it was like 10 VLOOKUPs, folks. Can you imagine? Yeah.
Would it handle slight variation in data types, meaning like date time precision? So you got slightly more precise in one, slightly less precise in the other. Does it care? Does it roll?
What is your favorite development language? SQL. All right. I knew you had one. Because your question, that's very, yeah, it's very nuanced. Okay, there are different data types of these columns, and I'll tell you that I am just so hyper paranoid about it that I always convert them to be the same data type before I link them up. Okay, like I have found occasionally that it's able to take a text-looking number and match it up with a number. But like when that happened, I deleted it and never spoke of it again, right? I don't want to know about that stuff. I want to assume that it only works when the data types match. And I actually think that they've been messing around with that a little bit too. I think that the answer to that question changes a little bit over time, and so I don't have one for you. Just make sure that when you link numbers to numbers, they're both numbers. And if it doesn't work, you're going to know in a hurry, because your report's going to look terrible. Yeah?
Does this just look similar to Power BI, or is it the same thing?
It's the same thing. This is the same as Power BI. Now, of course, it's implemented in different code. It's got different engineers making decisions about it. So it's got all kinds of little things. But like this existed before Power BI. Right. Now, I want you to also notice this. I can do the same thing with this returns table. I can do customer ID to this one and return date to this one. And ladies and gentlemen, when you have an orders and returns type problem, there is no amount of VLOOKUP that is ever going to save you. Do you understand what I'm talking about? When you have two tables like this, how would you VLOOKUP them together? Remember, Excel only lets you deal with one table at a time. That's Excel's MO. You can have any number of tables you want, as long as it's one. Right? When I have these other two, like customers and dates, Excel does give me a method, not a great one, but it gives me a method for merging it all into one table called VLOOKUP or its cousins, right? When I have two tables like this, though, two tables that are basically transactional in nature, I am hosed. If I want to produce a report out of these two, so let me just show you. Let me just show you the new world rather than railing on the old world. So I'll bring the field list back up. Take sales out of here. Take weekday off of there. Let's just go back to month year. Make it nice and simple. All right, I'm also going to show you measures. I've mentioned that this is a calculation engine as well. Remember the 10 years of development that went into a secret replacement for the calculated fields feature? That's what measures are. I'm going to write a really silly measure that you're going to be like, why do you need to do this, Rob? Sum of the orders table, no, orders sales amount. There we go. You see this formula? It's not written in A1 style syntax. There is no A1 style syntax in DAX, which is the formula language of Power Pivot. You will not miss A1 style syntax at all. It's basically like using name ranges all the time, but where the product creates and maintains the name ranges for you. If all Power Pivot was a version of Excel with named reference instead of A1 reference, you would crawl over broken glass to get to it, folks. Okay, sales dollars. Okay, so I just wrote another version of what I already had, which was the column. And why would I do that? Well, let's suspend disbelief for a moment. Return dollars, sum of returns, refund amount. Behold, ladies and gentlemen, a pivot table that should not exist, that cannot exist. This is an impossible pivot table. It's only 3 columns. There's nothing particularly fancy about it. It's even in a terrible font because for some reason this workbook is stuck in system font mode. And yet, I think for many of you in this room, this is the coolest thing you have ever seen. And you might not understand why yet. Let's say I challenged you to an Excel duel, all right? And I gave you the same data sources that I have, and I said, hey, we just need this report, just this report. I need a column of the sales amount and next to the months, and then a column of the refund amount for the same month. That's it. That's all I need. But in this duel, I stipulate that you have to use the old ways. You don't get to use the cool new stuff. I do. Right. From scratch, blank workbook, give me the data sources. I can arrive at this in about 60 to 80 seconds. That includes loading the data and everything, making the relationships, all of that. If I'm not teaching it, it's 60 seconds-ish. How, in regular Excel, are you even going to make a report that looks like this? There's definitely some hard coding, yeah.
I would combine the content of the sales orders and the returns into a single table, differentiate which row it was that I was doing, and then pivot and then use the column definition of the row name in order to aggregate by the sales orders and the returns.
So you'd create a third table that aggregated sales and returns by month, right?
Or include some data identifiers. But yeah,
Right.
Which
Which is totally legit, you know. And it's hard though, right? Because like we don't even have the names of the months and years in those 2 tables. We have the dates, right? This is unfun, really unfun. Now, another really common way to solve this problem, they all suck. All of the ways to do this are bad in regular Excel. Is to create 2 pivot tables. One against the orders and one against the refunds, and then create a report, a hard-coded report on a 3rd page with the labels on it, and then do like lookups and indexes into the 2 pivot tables, use them as like a data source, and to create your report. Okay, so none of the approaches for this are easy. They're all tedious, you know, really, really, really tedious. They're going to add a lot of stuff to your ongoing workload. Yeah, yeah. And then there's something else that happens to you, which is the person who asked you for this. They want it again, those bastards. Yeah, yeah. So I know so many jokes that are the truth about y'all. Right? Here's one. The worst thing, if you're good at Excel, the second worst thing you can do for yourself if you're good at Excel is to tell people that you're good at Excel. Okay? That's the second worst thing you can do. But the absolute worst thing you can do is build a truly valuable spreadsheet that people think is great. Because now, yeah, you are saddled to that. That is like a ball and chain around your ankle. And the only way to escape your own portfolio of spreadsheets is to change jobs. And by the way, at that moment when the Excel person, they always call them that, the Excel person, when the Excel person changes jobs, that's very often when we win some new business. That's when our phone rings. Oh boy, klaxons are blaring. Yeah, so, but they can do something, even in the moment, they can do something that hurts you. Right now, you slaved at this thing to produce this, right? You worked really hard. You come in, give it to them, and they go, oh, that's perfect. It's exactly what I needed. Hey, you know, we also need to see it broken out by customer tier. Yeah, yeah, that happens, right? So, watch this, folks. Oh, customer tier? Like, you mean like this? No, you mean like this. Did you see that? Oh, you know what? That's it. I'm just gonna go home now.
You mean you didn't give it to them like that so that when they asked the question, you'd already given them the answer?
Oh, no. So this is, folks, this is really important career advice, okay? So 2 things. First of all, this is not technical, but it's important, it really is. It's funny, but it's also important. Number 1, there is nothing wrong with these people that move the goalposts at the last minute. Sadly, we want them to be wrong, but they're not. This is just how human beings work. I told the last group this as well. I've learned this the hard way on the outside, didn't know this at Microsoft. Human beings do not know what they want until they have seen what they asked for. Just accept that. The whole notion of a specification or a requirements document is a fiction. We've all been lying to ourselves and to each other. You're never going to get a requirements document, execute on it to the letter, interpret everything properly, and be done. It's not going to happen. It's always iterative. Always, always, always iterative. Now, let's go back to my Excel duel, okay? So I've just been sitting around, you know, like drinking a beer after my 60 seconds of work to get to the original report. And as soon as you show up, you know, kind of sweaty, with your version of the report that you've had to manually cobble together, I say, well, you know, that's not actually what I needed. I needed it broke out by customer tier. Back to your desk, right? That second version of the report is going to take you much longer even than the first one. It's way worse, right? Now, this happens to you in meetings today, right? Because the same thing happens, right? They don't know what they need. They really don't. Even we do this to ourselves when we're building things for us, our reports for ourselves. We build something and go, it's not quite right. You know, so we have to tweak it. In the old world, you know, yesterday, this is what happens. They don't get what they want, right? Because there's no way you can execute on their new request in remotely a time frame that will help them in that meeting or whatever, right? So they lose, but you also lose because they're very confused at why you're broken. You know, they're looking at this report going like, I don't understand. Why don't you just come over here and start typing in gold, silver, bronze, like, you know? Because they think of Excel as Word with a grid. And that's it. And it's a development tool. It's a programming language. But they think of it as Word with a grid. All right, so in the new world, this is the last piece of funny but true advice. In the new world, when they move the goalpost, they change the requirements on you at the last minute, which we now know to be okay, what you do is the following. First, you go, kind of little grimace, just a little bit of a, like, that's hard. You set the stage. And then the very next sentence is, you know what, let me see what I can do. Okay? All right. And then you go away where they can't see you. And you drag this here. Okay. All right. And then you wait 30 minutes. All right. Now, again, it's funny, right? It's funny, but there's also a really strong thread of truth in this. If they see you check that checkbox, they will think, oh, it's only checking a checkbox. Okay? And they will go right back to devaluing everything that you do. The thing is, though, folks, you earned that checkbox. You learned how to do it a different way. You built the spreadsheet in a way that the checkbox would work. They'll never understand that. Don't let them see the checkbox. Right? That 30-minute waiting period, I'm not telling you you need to waste the time. Like, you could answer email, something, right? Be productive. I don't care. But the only pushback I've been telling this joke, quote-unquote joke, for many, many years now. The only pushback I've gotten from people who've heard this from me and come back to me years later is they're like, no, Rob, it's more like 90 minutes. I'm not kidding. That happens. That's the only pushback I've ever gotten on this. 90 minutes, 30 minutes, it's fast. Super fast. Don't let them see the checkbox, though, okay? For the love of God, don't let them see the checkbox. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. So I've been cheating here. That's what this dummy table called metrics is that I created. And it just, by default, it parks all of my measures on the first table that it saw when I was loading. So this is just a dummy placeholder just to give me a node in the tree, okay? But by default, it'll put it on whatever table I had selected in the field list, and it'll just be another checkbox at the bottom of that table. And measures cannot go anywhere other than the values area. Try as you might. You try to put them on rows or filters or columns, you get the no smoking sign. But it'll let you drop it in values. That's the only place a measure can go. That make sense?
How did you get them to show in a separate location on the pivot?
Well, I'm a big scammer. And I created this fake table called metrics. Kind of like on a cooking show. Here's the table I prepared earlier. I created this dummy table metrics that is not intended to hold any data. It's a single row, single column, and I've even hidden that column from the field list so it doesn't even show up. But I needed a column, otherwise I don't have a table. And this just becomes a dummy placeholder where I can attach measures to. And I've created multiple dummy tables like that. Things like budget measures is what I'll call one of them, and revenue measures will be another one, and customer retention measures will be another one.
You created that DAX within that metrics table.
Sort of. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter what table you put it on. The formula is never going to return different results. It's not structurally important. It's more cosmetic in terms of where it puts things. It also powers the some of those warnings we get about needing a relationship. Look at where the measure is. They don't look at the actual formula, unfortunately. So I just always ignore those warnings. If my numbers look good, I'm good. What do you think, folks? How about, should we do another measure? Let's do one where we say, you want to do sales less returns, or do you want to do return percentage? Which one's more interesting? Return percentage? Okay. Return percentage. I'm going to even use the name. I'm going to just use the symbol percent in the name of something in my formulas. Just to tempt fate. I'm going to use this function, this weird function called divide. I asked the last class, do you know why they have a function called divide? And I won't wait for an answer. The answer is the divide function does the same math as the slash operator, but it builds in inherent protection against division by zero. No more if error. If it gets a div by zero, it just sends back a blank. Oh, you don't like blanks? There's a third argument where you can set an alternate result of your choosing. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to put that phone away, or you're going to... I need a picture of you taking that picture. This is the divide function, audience reaction. So great. Anyway, you can send back if you get div by 0, you could also send back 1 for 100%, 0 for 0%. In Power BI, maybe even here in my version of Excel, you can also send back a text, like it does not compute or NA in quotes if you wanted. But very often, the default blank is sufficient. Doesn't like that measure. What did I do wrong? Man, I am terrible today. Extra comma, oh yeah, I left in, yeah. I was trying to be helpful. That'll teach me. All right, thank you, folks. So there we go, return percentage. Hey, these two feed this one, right? This is the ratio of those? Huh. What happens if I take the originals off of there? Oh, it doesn't break. It just keeps working. Isn't that nice? Huh. Maybe we should do this. Maybe we should put some conditional formatting on this, like maybe like make it red, you know, because higher numbers are worse. You know, ooh, there's something in here is messing with us, right? Oh, there's, right? So the bronze tier customers were killing us in November 2009. What's that? What? What are you talking? Yeah, so this is another one of those cases where I bring my little square reader with me, and you can, if we swipe your credit card, I'll show you what I. All right, so I'll show you. And by the way, folks,
Wait 30 minutes.
This happens every single time I do this, right? Because it is okay. So here we go. I select any cell I want that's got the number, you know, at least one of the numbers that I care about formatting. Then I go to the Home tab of the Excel ribbon, conditional formatting dropdown. Okay. Now, data bars and color scales are the two that I use the most. Those are the cool ones. Icon sets, sometimes, very rarely. The icon sets don't allow the eye to compare things that well. They're kind of awkward. These two are great. So I did data bars, and then up here, these default colors, and you've got ones with gradients. If you've never taken, you know, a visualization class from one of the chart police, you know, gradients are okay until you've taken one of those classes, and then you're not allowed to do that anymore. And you've got to use the solid fills. But if you've got a manager that really likes the gradients, don't be stupid. Use the gradients, okay? Just give them what they want. But we'll be good little soldiers in here, and we'll use the solid fill. And I'm choosing a red color here because we want return percentage to be smaller, right? So you know, I wouldn't want to make this one green, but that's kind of up to you. Okay, so now it formatted a single cell, which is, of course, useless. Now, you'll notice here that two little buttons appeared next to that cell. Okay, this one's terrible. Don't use this. That's no good. But this button here, this little button looks like a pivot table. I believe is one of the coolest buttons ever added to the entire product. Why is that, you say? Well, because I put it in there. It allows you to stick the conditional formatting rule to the structure of the pivot rather than to the cell, you know, C4 or whatever that is. Okay? Now, normally, the most common thing I select is this one, which says apply it to all cells like me at the same level. Meaning if I'm on a subtotal, only apply it to the subtotals. Because with most metrics that add up, like dollars that are, you know, that counting metrics that get bigger as you roll them up, the subtotals will skew your entire scale, and the grand total will really skew the scale. So you don't want those to participate. But this one, because it's a percentage measure, is going to be, you know, in theory, on the same scale at all levels, right? Because it's bigger number divided by bigger number. So in this case, it's totally safe for me to pick the middle one, which is apply it to everywhere this measure was used. And so that does include the totals in that rule. If I'd picked the third one, it would have left the I was on the subtotal row when I did it, so yeah. That make sense? And this one's really cool, these data bars, by the way. If you've got percentage values that go negative sometimes, give it a green positive axis, and it'll give you red negative axis right in the middle of the cell. It's so cool. Like, you can just like add like 5% to your pay right there. Just say, yeah, I'm the one that makes those bar chart pivot tables now, so pay me. Question?
The first method you did that I was familiar with formatting, are those variations on how to apply it selectively and change the scope? Are those not in that higher level, the conditional formatting button in the ribbon?
Yeah, they're not up here unless, so the goal of this button was to make it like really quick and easy. And it's not really, there's no real quick and easy way to do it with pivot tables. Now, if you want to go to manage rules and create a new rule this way, now you can set it the first time. And this was always in the plans. This wasn't my feature.
I've never seen it selectively applied at one cell and then that pop out.
Yeah,
That thing
yeah.
you're proud of?
This is the way the cool kids do it. Yeah, I do it this way too, though. All right, what did you think about that? That's good. How are we doing time-wise? We're done? Right now? Seriously? Oh my goodness, that was fantastic timing. Yeah, we really just scratched the surface. What I was trying to blaze through there is usually a 3-day class that we teach. So there's a lot of explanation. We teach 2 days on the data modeling, which is the Power Pivot stuff, and then 1 day of Power Query, which I didn't even get to show you. Even though this was really cool, you will think Power Query is even cooler. However, it is not better. So Power Query, I'll just tell you what it is. Power Query is also, it's hiding on your data ribbon under Get and Transform, if you're on a more recent version of Excel. This would just say Power Query here. It is like text to columns with memory, so that it will replay the text to columns, the steps that you took. But it's way more than that. It's text to columns, it's merge a bunch of files together into one table, it's all kinds of things. And it's stuff that you're already doing every day, cleaning data on a repetitive basis, and it helps you automate that. And this is why when I show Power Query to a crowd like this, everyone's just like gets really like rabid about it. Because it fits your existing workflows and takes away a lot of pain, right? It totally makes sense. However, like, it's just one piece of the puzzle. The data modeling stuff that I was doing, linking up tables and writing measures, that skill set is something you're doing and solving problems that you don't currently solve today, that you just take a pass on, that your organization takes a pass on. And I will tell you that the data modeling, the DAX, and all that kind of stuff, the DAX formulas that I was writing, that stuff, we have created single workbooks for our clients, folks. I'm not kidding. There is a single workbook out there that started its life with the file extension XLSX that has been running now for like 6 or 7 years. It has added $25 million a year to their bottom line every year it's been running. We did that before Power Query was even invented. And the only way to get these massive, massive, massive wins that are much bigger than you, much bigger than your salary, is to leverage this data modeling and DAX and stuff, the stuff that I was showing you in here. I'm just sort of, even just barely scratching the surface. And that's why I always lead with this, because I know once I show you Power Query, I would never get your attention back on anything else. You go look at some Power Query videos on YouTube, you'll be hooked on that, no problem, okay? But yeah, thanks for coming. I hope this was valuable. See you next year.